Marco Polo, inventor of the summertime pool game and OG travel influencer, starting the trend by backpacking from Italy to China way back in the 13th century. And he wasn't the "let's go to Bali and get shit-faced off $3 type. I mean, he was travelling with his dad and uncle. He was more like the world's a book and those who don't travel read only one page type of guy. Starting in their hometown, Venice, the trio ended up in the courts of Kublai Khan, the ruler of China at the time. Their mammoth return trip to Europe took them in a loop down around India, via Sumatra, Sri Lanka, and into the Persian Gulf. Their trip took over 24 years to complete, so I guess just enough time to really find themselves. If the internet existed in the 13th century, Marco Props would have had a travel blog and Insta account with captions like, "Man can't discover new oceans unless he has the courage to lose sight of the shore." We know this because Marco did the most online thing possible for someone forced to be offline. He wrote a book about his travels, or at least he had someone write one for him. Enter The Travels of Marco Polo. It's what we've got here. Well, I have the part of it that recounts what he saw in India. It's written with a certain kind of trust me bro air about it. In the first few pages, there's about 5, "let me tell you how I did this," and "let me tell you how they did that" kind of phrasing. It'd have me poo-pooing if it wasn't for recognisable detail and continuity with aspects of Indian culture we know today. From worshipping cows, to yogis, to using one hand for eating and the other for butt wiping. Though Marco does make some wilder claims, like tarantulas influencing business deals and people baiting eagles to gather diamonds, plus heaps more. My suggestion is to take this with the same pinch of salt as you would for any white TikToker's POV on exotic cultures. To start, Marco tells us there are 5 kingdoms in Malabar, each ruled by one of 5 brother kings. They'd get into arguments and want to go to war about it, but every time there was a family feud, their mum would pop out her titties and say, "Each one of you sucked on these. Don't you dare fight with each other or I'll swear I'll cut 'em off. Oh, you're so cruel to your mother." Crisis averted, apparently. These kingdoms were unimaginably wealthy, making their moolah through pearls and gemstones. Basically all the world's sapphires, emeralds, rubies and diamonds came from these parts. The various kings would keep the very best for themselves, usually offering up double the market value of the biggest and best pearls that were fished up or gems that were dug up, an offer which traders were only too happy to cash in on. There was also a nearby kingdom ruled by an old beloved widow queen. Marco says diamonds were abundant in the mountains of her kingdom, mostly found in caves and deep ravines. However, the caves were infested with venomous snakes, so people diamond hunted in a different way. They went sky fishing. They'd apparently tie lumps of meat to throw into a ravine where the meat would get all crusted with diamonds. Eagles of the mountains would see the meat as an easy meal and swoop down to get a tasty diamond-crusted steak. The fishermen would follow the eagle's flight path, scare them away from their treat, and hey presto, diamonds. Naturally, the eagles might get a few beakfuls of their soon-to-be dispossessed prize, so it was also worth going to the nests to rifle through eagle excrement. Gross, but I prefer shit diamonds to blood diamonds any day of the week. While the kingdoms of Malabar were incredibly wealthy on account of all the pretty rocks they had, each successor compounded the wealth of their father. The tradition was for the new ruler not to touch what their predecessor had accumulated, since they should be clever enough to profit off the kingdom without relying on daddy's money. It was an approach that seemed to reflect a society hell-bent on maxing out their mercantile skill tree. Marco says at 13, boys were cut off from eating at their father's table. They'd be given some money and it was up to them to use it, turn a profit, and earn a living. From then on, mum could still cook their food, they had to pay for it. The intention was to build a robust society of businessmen, and though it was a trade culture from top to bottom, the king still had the huge benefit of inheriting daddy's power and business. However, they also would have benefited from a few hard-earned business lessons too. In a move that proves dollars can't buy cents, the 5 brother kings spent literal fortunes filling their garages with horsepower that depreciated to 0 value within a year. They were obsessed with horses, buying around 2,000 a year. Luckily, they had access to the best, most beautifully bred horses from all over the Arabian Peninsula. Unluckily, they had no fucking idea how to look after them, feeding them with meat, rice, and other cooked foods. The opportunistic horse traders wouldn't allow anyone who could actually care for the horses remotely near these rich suckers, since most of the horses would die within the year, setting up next season's market demand. What the heck? Goes to show exploitation and market manipulation is truly an ageless pastime. Marco noted that Indian spirituality and superstition ran deep. So deep, he says it augmented their behaviour and business dealings, to the point where a person might head out to run errands or do business, but turn right back around if they heard someone sneeze with no subsequent positive omens to mitigate this frightful occurrence. Also, each day had a cursed hour and they refused to trade in it, otherwise all their dealings would fail. Honestly, fantastic. I want to be able to call out of work if the vibes are off. As I mentioned at the start, Marco says Indian merchants took investment advice from tarantula trader bros. No, literally. He said people's houses were infested with tarantulas. If there was one around while they were doing deals, and especially if it hissed, merchants would look at its position relative to theirs and use it to work out if the deal was good or shite, for the buyer or the seller, or for both of them. If the tarantula was in an auspicious position, the deal would tank. Spider market sentiment may be my new favourite financial concept. The tarantula infestations also prompted the invention of suspended beds that could be hoisted off the ground to escape the leggy roommates. Hoisted beds had the added benefit of getting up into the airflow since the climate was hot, like super hot. So hot that everyone got around naked except for a loincloth. And when Marco says everyone, he means even the kings. Instead of fine and fancy fabrics, they were pimped out in a metric ton of bling. We're talking jewel-encrusted armbands, jewel-encrusted leg bands. We're talking strings of pearls and long-ass necklaces of diamonds and emeralds and all sorts of precious stones. Everyone was fastidiously clean too, bathing twice a day. And they'd pour drinks into their mouths instead of putting their lips to any cups. And cups. They'd never, ever, ever share their cup with another person. If you wanted a drink and didn't BYO cup, you'd have to use your hands. Some traditions mentioned are familiar today, even to an ignorant Westerner like moi. For example, people doing the clean stuff with their right hand and the dirty stuff with their left hand. Also, Marco found a culture of people who venerated cows. Sounds familiar. No one would harm a cow, and most people wouldn't dare eat beef, with the exception of one group, who'd only eat it if the cow died of natural causes or by accident. They'd never dare to kill or harm one on purpose. He also mentions Brahmins, who he describes as people of incredible integrity. They're faithful to their wives, would never kill an animal, and are honest businessmen. Marco comments that if a foreigner wants to trade in India, they should find a Brahmin to retain as an intermediary, because Brahmins will represent their interests at least as well as they'd represent their own. Brahmins were also shamans, who, for the low price of 5% of a pearl haul's value, would cast spells to keep predatory fishes away. But only during the day, the fishes have free rein at night. Sure sounds legit to me. Marco even adds yogis to the mix, with reputations of long lives through simple living and eating sparingly, and definitely not anything living. Even their veggies were dried because any green meant the veggie's soul was still in there. The yogis value life to the point where they poo on the beach and make sure to disperse their crap in the waves. The thinking is that if they just left it, worms would live and grow in it. Then when the worms ate all the poop and ran out of food, they'd die. So the yogis' poop ultimately caused the worm's death. The same reasoning permeated society, and they cremated their dead on pyres rather than being buried only for their bodies to feed then kill worms. And while the rest of society rocked the loincloth, yogis went starkers. According to Marco, the yogis say they don't need to hide behind a loincloth because they've got nothing to be embarrassed about. Their dicks ain't up to mischief. In another section, Marco finds there's not a lot of sexual taboo, which makes me wonder what kind of stuff was considered embarrassing enough to hide. But the yogis are super chaste. Marco comments on a practice of theirs to sort out the pure little angels from the dirty sinners by having a group of baddies come up to fondle them and see what pops up. It's a hard test, in that anyone who gets hard fails. It's not really fair because the baddies who do the testing are in the service of deities. When the temple's priests determine their local god and goddess are having a domestic, they get the girlies to cook decadent food, take it to the temple, and set it before the divine statues. After serving the food, the girls dance their little hearts out for the god and goddess's pleasure. The idea is the divine pair will have such a good time they'll forget their argument and kiss and make up. Once the entertainment ends, the girls get to eat the food, and for their service, Marco reckons they're blessed with plump skin and perky boobies, much in demand, and very attractive marital prospects. Which is great, because you'd want to end up with a healthy young lad. Otherwise, if your husband died, you might be expected to throw yourself onto his funeral pyre to join him in death, Daenerys Targaryen styles, a tradition that kings and powerful leaders also expected of their besties. Burning at the stake aside, Marco was amazed at how safe the society was. Traders had such good legal protection while travelling on the roads that they could sleep with sacks of pearls and diamonds as pillows and not worry about theft. If anything got stolen, the kings would compensate for the loss. But if crimes were committed, the punishments reportedly got hectic. guys who were condemned to death could seek leave from the king to sacrifice themselves to their god of choice. Then they'd march through the streets declaring how amazing they were for giving themselves to this or that god. When they reached the execution area, they'd take a bunch of knives and swords and stick them into all their limbs, then finally launch their neck into the biggest sword to finish the job. Afterwards, everyone would celebrate and talk about how amazing it was for the dude to have sacrificed himself like that for his god. The crimes leading to the death sentence be damned. Apparently, one way to get a death sentence was by not paying your debts. Specifically, if the person you owed money to found you and drew a circle around you, you couldn't leave the circle until the debt was paid. Otherwise, you were dead. Marco says he even saw this happen to the king himself, because the king had been too lazy to pay some out-of-towner's invoice. After he was trapped in the circle by the merchant, the king acquiesced and promptly paid the guy. Everyone thought it was amazing the king followed his own law, but the king said, "I made it, it should especially apply to me." The crowd went wild for this. They really ate up the whole, "see, he's just like us" messaging. Great PR. The kings did have a humble streak. They sat on the ground. When Marco asked about this, the answer he got was, "It's honourable enough to sit on the ground, since we are made of the earth, and to the earth we must return." From which it follows that no one can honour the earth too highly, and no one should scorn it. The humble streak was paper thin though. They had a harem of wives and concubines. The richest of the 5 brother kings was so used to getting whatever woman he wanted that he stole one of his brother's wives. There might have been a war over the situation, if their mum hadn't pulled out the tried and true titty trick. Had the brothers not been kings, then they could have scrapped like the commoners. To initiate a fight, you'd spit in your enemy's face and say something like, "That's how much you're worth." The exact choice of words would determine if it was a 1v1 fight or a team battle. To win a 1v1, you draw a white circle on your opponent, wherever you wanted, and this was the target for you to stab at. For team battles, the king decided who won after watching a bit of gang violence unfold. Pretty wild stuff. Like a carefully curated Insta post, showing off only the best angles, it's tricky to know just how much of what Marco recounted was legit and how much was embellishment. What's undeniable is there's a lot of what he says that remains identifiable in Indian culture even now. In a time where the world felt much bigger than it is today, I can only imagine how outlandish and exotic Marco's stories would have sounded to his fellow Europeans. No wonder that, as the OG travel influencer, Marco's exploits would go on to inspire other would-be backpackers, including some obscure fellow called Christopher Columbus, who admittedly probs could have used a bit more of Marco's take only photos, leave only footprints approach to travel. Anywho, that's all from me. Thank you.